When you build a house, you spend just an enormous amount of time thinking about the visible things,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. The aesthetics.
Right, the aesthetics, the paint colors in the hallway, or, I mean, the layout of the kitchen, the light fixtures. You just obsess over the things you can see and
Yeah,
touch.
the things you interact with every day.
Exactly. But you almost never think about the foundation, that massive concrete slab buried deep under the dirt. You just, you assume it's there.
You assume it's perfectly solid.
Right. Until one day, there's a jagged crack in the drywall or the front door suddenly weren't shut properly, and then it hits you.
That's a terrifying moment as a homeowner.
It really is. Because you realize that without that invisible underlying foundation, the entire structure you've built is completely compromised. The beautiful paint job doesn't matter at all if the house is sinking.
It's just cosmetic at that point.
Yeah. And today we're looking at the foundation of human existence itself. And honestly, the terrifying reality of what happens when society tries to demolish it. We're doing a deep dive into excerpts and summaries of Ravi Zacharias' seminal book, Can Man Live Without God?
And it is a text that fundamentally challenges the bedrock of how modern society constructs its reality. I mean, the book forces a confrontation with the assumptions we make every single day about why we're here and, well, what we're supposed to be doing.
And for today's deep dive, we are taking a very specific lens to this philosophical and theological material. We want to answer this central question. How does this book inspire Christians to love Christ more deeply and live for him more fully in their daily lives?
Which is such an important angle.
I think so, too. We aren't just looking at this as a purely academic or intellectual exercise. We want to know how the concepts in this text transform your Tuesday morning commute.
Right.
Or the conversations at the dinner table. Or those quiet, sometimes desperate moments of personal reflection when you're just sitting on the couch at night.
Well, to understand how the text achieves that kind of practical transformation, it really helps to look at how the author structured the argument.
Okay, let's get into it.
The book operates simultaneously on three distinct levels. So first, there's the theoretical level. This is the realm of logic, reason, and rigorous philosophical argumentation.
Heavy lifting.
Exactly. It appeals directly to the mind and demands intellectual honesty. But then second, it operates on an artistic and emotional level.
And I love that about this book.
Yeah, the author heavily engages with the arts, culture, literature, poetry, and the deep, often unarticulated felt longings of the human heart.
Which is what keeps it from reading like a dry, sterile seminary textbook. It pulls from lived human experience.
Precisely why it resonates so deeply with people. And the third level is the practical, the everyday reality of human interaction. The book's core argument is sweeping but entirely clear. That rejecting God doesn't just mean you misplace a religion or, stop going to a building on Sunday mornings. It means you lose the very categories that make human life intelligible.
Wow.
Yeah, without that foundation, the inevitable result, both historically and personally, is moral bankruptcy and existential despair.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly appreciate the light, you have to understand the darkness.
You do.
We have to start by looking at this dark reality of a godless worldview. Because it serves as the stark, necessary backdrop for appreciating the immense beauty and coherence of a life rooted in Christ. I mean, you can't understand the rescue if you don't realize the ship is sinking.
That's a great way to put it. And to set that backdrop, the source material brings us to a really pivotal moment in intellectual history. It introduces the philosophy of nihilism through Friedrich Nietzsche's famous parable of the madman.
I feel like a lot of people have heard of this, but maybe don't know the context.
Right. So, for those who might not be familiar with the specifics of the parable, Nietzsche describes a madman who runs into the marketplace in the early morning hours. He's carrying a lit lantern, and he's crying out, "I seek God! I seek God!"
And the people's reaction is key here.
It is. The townspeople in the marketplace, many of whom have already embraced a secular, atheistic worldview, they just mock him. They laugh.
They think he's crazy.
Exactly. But then the madman delivers a chilling verdict. He looks at them and says, "God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him."
And the text points out something crucial here. People often misinterpret that quote today. You see it on T-shirts or it's quoted in online debates as some sort of triumphant atheist victory lap.
Yes.
Like as if humanity finally outgrew its need for an imaginary friend.
They think Nietzsche was cheering. He absolutely wasn't. It was a prophetic, terrified diagnosis. Nietzsche was warning the world about what Enlightenment rationalism had actually done.
Okay, let's define that really quick for everyone listening.
Sure. If we want to define Enlightenment rationalism simply, it was an intellectual movement that essentially claimed human reason and the scientific method alone could figure out the universe.
So effectively trying to fire God from his position as the ultimate source of truth and morality.
That's exactly it. And Nietzsche saw that by intellectually rejecting God, humanity had severed its ties to any transcendent moral order. He understood something that many modern thinkers try to ignore. You cannot just erase God and keep the morality that God provided.
Okay, I have to stop you there and play devil's advocate because this is the immediate pushback you hear today. Doesn't Nietzsche's madman seem a bit dramatic?
In what way?
Well, we live in a world with millions of secular, non-religious people who are perfectly good neighbors. They don't steal, they don't murder, they give to charity. Can't we just build a solid moral foundation on human well-being and empathy without needing a divine rule book?
It is a totally fair question, and it's the crux of the modern secular argument. But the text addresses this by explaining the concept of borrowed moral capital.
Borrowed moral capital. I like that phrase.
Yeah, those secular neighbors are operating on the lingering fumes of a Judeo-Christian moral framework that society was actually built upon. They are living in a house they didn't build.
Ah, going back to the house analogy.
Exactly. Let's look at the mechanism of why erasing God erases objective morality. If we are just accidental biology, if there is no creator who designed us with purpose, then concepts like human rights or justice or evil, they're just imaginary fictions.
We just invented them to keep society running smoothly.
Right, they aren't real objective things in the universe.
It's like the rules of a board game. We all just agree to play by them, but they aren't woven into the fabric of reality.
It's a perfect analogy. Consider nature.
Hmm.
You can't look at a lion eating an antelope and call the lion evil or accuse it of murder.
Right, it's just biology doing what biology does. It's nature.
Well, if God is dead and human beings are nothing more than highly evolved animals, then human behavior is just nature too. The strong dominating the weak isn't an injustice. It's just Darwinian survival. Nietzsche understood this terrifying logic. You wipe away God, you wipe away the entire reference point for up and down, good and evil. You are left in an absolute moral vacuum.
It's fascinating how that plays out today because initially, to modern ears, the idea of a universe without God sounds incredibly liberating.
It does.
Our culture champions this idea of ultimate autonomy. No accountability to a higher power, no final judgment, no restrictive divine rules holding you back. It sounds like you are finally the captain of your own ship, just living entirely for your own personal desires.
The self becomes the highest authority. You define your own truth. You curate your own morality based on whatever feels, authentic to you in the moment. It is the core seductive promise of modern secularism.
But the text really exposes the fatal flaw in this thinking. Let's use an analogy to understand how this mechanism of freedom actually works.
I love a good analogy.
Okay, imagine you are an astronaut on a spacewalk, tethered to the International Space Station. That tether restricts your movement. You can only go so far. You are bound to the massive ship.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Now, imagine you decide you want ultimate, unrestricted freedom, so you pull out a knife and cut the tether. Are you free? Well, technically, yes. You are completely free from the ship's constraints. You can float in any direction.
But you're in deep trouble.
Right. What is that tether actually doing? It's not just a rope. It is delivering your oxygen. It is your navigation system. It is the only thing keeping you from drifting into the endless freezing void. Cutting that tether isn't liberation.
It is suffocation.
Exactly. That freedom is actually a death sentence in the vacuum of space.
That captures the essence of the text's argument perfectly. You haven't liberated yourself, you've doomed yourself to drift into nothingness. And the sources don't just leave this as a philosophical thought experiment about astronauts or 19th century German philosophers.
No, they don't.
The book traces the horrific historical outworking of this severed tether. When you remove a transcendent moral reference point, the consequences are devastating in the real world. Ideas have consequences, and bad ideas have casualties.
The examples the book uses to illustrate this are incredibly sobering.
They really are. The text cites Viktor Frankl, the renowned psychiatrist and survivor of the Auschwitz concentration camp. Frankl observed firsthand that the horrors of the Holocaust didn't just emerge from a sudden political vacuum or a bad election cycle.
It was deeper than that.
Much deeper. They emerged from a deeply rooted philosophical vacuum. He noted the specific mechanism at play. When a society begins to view human beings merely as products of heredity and environment, when we are reduced to nothing more than complex deterministic biology without a divine spark or inherent God-given dignity, It paves the way for atrocities.
Because if humans are just matter, they can be disposed of like matter. You aren't murdering a soul, you are just rearranging chemicals.
That is the grim, unavoidable logic. And the text shares another chilling account, this one from Svetlana Stalin, regarding her father, the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin.
This part was wild to me.
Yeah, what is often forgotten is that Stalin had actually trained for the priesthood in his youth in a seminary. He knew the theology, but he turned violently and absolutely against God. Svetlana recounted her father's deathbed scene, describing a man consumed by intense anger and paranoia, shaking his fist at the ceiling in his final moments. He had presided over the deaths of tens of millions of his own people, operating in a complete moral vacuum where his own political will was the only law.
And so the historical record demonstrates clearly that when you eliminate the divine lawgiver, human tyrants inevitably rush in to fill the void, and the results are catastrophic.
Completely catastrophic.
It's that realization that ultimate freedom from God just leads to ultimate tyranny, either politically on a massive scale or personally within our own minds. And on a personal, psychological level, this brings up one of the most profound quotes highlighted in our sources.
No, go ahead.
The text states, "Meaninglessness does not come from being weary of pain. It comes from being weary of pleasure."
That is a staggering insight into the modern human condition. It cuts right through the noise of how we currently live.
Think about the listener right now, sitting on the couch on a Tuesday night. Our entire culture is built on the premise that the ultimate goal of life is to minimize pain and maximize pleasure.
Right. If you just get the right promotion, curate the perfect Instagram aesthetic, buy the house in the right zip code, and go on enough vacations, you'll finally be happy.
But the text argues that when you achieve all those things without a transcendent purpose, you hit a concrete wall of absolute emptiness. You do the doom scrolling, you binge the shows, you have a full refrigerator, a comfortable climate-controlled life, and yet there is this hollow ache in your chest.
Because you become weary, not because life is too hard, but because the pleasures are simply too small to fill the God-shaped void inside you.
Yes, we can synthesize this directly for the daily walk of the Christian. What is the practical takeaway from facing this dark reality of the madman's worldview?
Well, recognizing the sheer destructive emptiness of a life built solely on self-gratification is meant to inspire a profound shift in the believer. It inspires the Christian to gladly and willfully submit their desires to God.
Because it's better.
Exactly. It's the deep realization that true fulfillment isn't found in acquiring the next temporary thrill or engaging in what we might call the idolatry of the gift.
Okay, the idolatry of the gift. Unpack that phrase, because that feels central to everything we are discussing.
The idolatry of the gift happens when we take a good thing God created, whether it's a romantic love, career success, financial stability, or even simple physical pleasure, and we elevate it to the position of God.
We make it the ultimate thing.
Right. We demand that the gift provide us with the ultimate meaning, identity, and security that only the giver can provide. When we do that, the gift inevitably crushes us under the weight of those expectations because it was never designed to bear that load.
It wasn't built for that.
No. Surrendering your autonomy to a purpose infinitely higher than yourself is how you escape that crushing weight. When you truly understand the despair of a worldview without God, the boundaries and laws of God's design no longer feel like a restrictive prison.
They feel like a rescue operation.
Precisely.
You stop fighting the tether and realize the tether is your lifeline. But recognizing you are in a dark room doesn't automatically turn on the lights. If throwing off moral constraints just leads to this suffocating vacuum, how do we actually begin to construct a life that feels deeply meaningful? Where is the starting point for human flourishing?
Well, the sources suggest it begins with something every single one of us inherently possessed when we were children.
This brings us to the first of 4 essential integrated components of meaning that the book outlines. These 4 components are the building blocks of a coherent worldview. The first component is wonder.
Wonder.
I'll be honest, in a deep philosophical text, starting with wonder sounds almost too simple, doesn't it? It sounds like something from a children's book.
It sounds simple, but the psychological and spiritual implications are deeply profound. Wonder is what gives human life its color. It is the fountainhead of genuine gratitude. Wonder prevents our existence from flattening out into a sterile spreadsheet of mere biological processes and cold, hard facts. It is the ability to look at the world, to look at a sunrise or a newborn child and be captivated by the mystery and the beauty, recognizing that it didn't have to exist, yet it does.
The source material has a beautiful anecdote about this, involving the author's own daughter. It perfectly captures the mechanics of what wonder looks like in practice and how it contrasts with the cynical adult world.
Oh, I love this story.
The author, Ravi Zacharias, describes a scenario where he is in a tense immigration office. There's an Israeli soldier stationed there, and the atmosphere is incredibly thick with the stress, suspicion, and hostility that naturally accompanies regions in heavy conflict.
Right. Everyone in that room is on edge.
Everyone is operating in this hyper-vigilant adult world of rigid rules, political divisions, and potential threats.
It is a profoundly sterile, high-stakes environment where every person is viewed as either a liability or a danger.
And into this tightly wound environment walks his young daughter, Sarah. She doesn't see the complex geopolitics. She doesn't view the heavy military uniform and the weapon as a threat.
She just sees another human being.
Exactly. And with complete innocence and uncalculated wonder, she walks right up to this hardened soldier and asks, "Excuse me, do you have any bubble gum?"
It's a tiny interaction, but the psychological shift in the room is massive. It completely pierces the manufactured tension.
It disarms everyone. The story illustrates how innocent wonder diffuses hostility. It completely broke the spell of the room and reawakened a momentary, powerful sense of shared humanity and simple joy.
The soldier smiled.
The tension evaporated. It highlights a massive truth about how children interact with the reality of the world versus how adults do. Children live in a state of constant enchantment. They assume the world is full of good things waiting to be discovered.
What's fascinating here is how the text brilliantly connects this childlike wonder to the writings of the British author and philosopher G.K. Chesterton, specifically his concept of the ethics of elfland.
Chesterton is so good.
He really is. He argued that fairy tales are incredibly important, not because they are escapist fantasies, but because they teach us the fundamental, correct posture we should maintain toward reality itself. He outlined 3 specific elements of these tales that mirror a healthy, functioning worldview.
I love this concept. Let's break down those 3 elements of Elfland.
Okay, first, fairy tales always operate on a clear moral principle. There is definitive good and definitive evil. The dragons are bad, and the knights protecting the innocent are good. The moral lines are stark and undeniable.
Right, there's no gray area.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Second, there are specific, unalterable rules or conditions that the characters absolutely must accept. Think of Cinderella having to leave the royal ball by the stroke of midnight, or a character in a myth not being allowed to open a specific forbidden door.
And they don't usually get a reason why.
No, the fundamental nature of these rules isn't always explained to the character. Cinderella doesn't get a lecture on the quantum mechanics of fairy godmother magic. The rules just are, and they are absolute.
Okay, and the third?
And third, and most importantly, there is a childlike readiness in the hero to accept those rules without cynical questioning. The hero accepts the mystery of the rule, submits to it, and operates within it. And that submission is what ultimately leads to the happily ever after and the triumph over evil.
To understand how rules create freedom, let's use another analogy. Think about learning to play the piano. When you first sit down, the strict rules of music theory, the endless repetition of scales, and the rigid requirement of keeping time all feel like a prison.
It feels incredibly restrictive.
It really does. But if you submit to those rigid rules, if you let them shape your hands and your mind, eventually you gain the ultimate freedom to sit down and improvise a complex jazz piece. True freedom, true beauty requires binding yourself to a law first. You don't get the jazz without the scales. You don't get the happily ever after without obeying the midnight rule.
That perfectly illustrates Chesterton's point. But as adults, we lose that willingness to submit to the mystery. The text heavily laments this adult loss of wonder.
We think we outgrow it.
We do. We grow up, and the prevailing winds of secularism and this exhaustive, arrogant pursuit of pure rational knowledge convince us that we need to explain everything away. We want to put every single aspect of the universe under a microscope, break it down into its base chemical components until, as the text poignantly puts it, nothing is left to know.
We want to dissect the magic trick to see exactly how the illusion is done. We want to be the masters of the information.
But the tragedy is that when you dissect a living thing to see how its organs work, you end up killing the creature. That exhaustive pursuit of absolute rational mastery strips the enchantment and the divine fingerprint from the world. It inevitably leads to deep cynicism and profound existential boredom.
Because there's no mystery left.
Exactly. We pride ourselves in becoming wise and enlightened, but we are actually just becoming jaded and spiritually dead. The sources reference the biblical book of Job here, which is the perfect illustration of this human tendency.
Oh, Job is such a good example.
Job undergoes immense suffering, and he wants all the answers. He wants to drag the Almighty God into a human courtroom and demand a line-by-line explanation for the exact mechanics of his suffering and the management of the universe.
He wants the spreadsheets, he wants the receipts.
He wants to eliminate the mystery. And God's response to Job is fascinating. He doesn't give Job a theological white paper on the problem of pain. God gives him a majestic, overwhelming tour of the cosmos. He points to the stars, the oceans, the strange creatures of the deep.
He reintroduces wonder.
Yes. God intentionally confronts human limits to affirm the absolute necessity of mystery. He shows Job that a universe small enough for the human mind to fully comprehend and neatly categorize would be far too small to be governed by a sovereign, infinite, and awe-inspiring God.
So if you are the Christian listening to this right now, doing the dishes or driving to work, how does this change your day? The text makes the application clear. The Christian is explicitly called to live with a posture of enchanted gratitude.
Enchanted gratitude.
Recognizing that there is an active creator restores a healthy, robust sense of wonder. It allows believers to look at the world not as a sterile, accidental machine of atoms colliding in a meaningless void, but as a deliberate, breathtaking masterpiece. And that masterpiece points directly to Christ. Christ is the ultimate integration of mystery and knowability.
That is the beautiful paradox of the Christian faith. We can know him intimately and personally as a friend and savior, yet we will spend all of eternity marveling at the infinite, unfathomable depths of his divine nature.
Right.
That is the daily application. When you walk outside, you don't just see a tree undergoing the biological process of photosynthesis. You see the deliberate handiwork of an artist, and that prompts spontaneous worship instead of just cold observation.
It completely reframes reality. But as the text readily acknowledges, a child eventually has to grow up. You can't live in the innocence of a fairy tale forever.
No, you can't.
Eventually, you face real pain. You face loss, betrayal, and the harsh realities of a broken world. You have to look at all that wonder and ask the hard question. But is it actually real? Or am I just comforting myself with a nice story? Fantasy, no matter how beautiful, isn't enough to sustain you when you are standing at the graveside of someone you love. And that inevitable crisis leads us to the second component of meaning.
The transition from childhood wonder to adult maturity inevitably brings a strict demand for truth. Wonder is essential for giving life color, but it must be firmly grounded in objective reality, or it dissolves into mere sentimentality.
Okay, so how do we ground it?
The text outlines that this deeply human hunger for truth is driven by the urgent need to answer life's four fundamental questions. These are the unavoidable, inescapable questions of human existence that every person and every culture throughout all of history wrestles with.
Let's lay out those four questions, because they form the grid for evaluating everything we believe.
They are: origin, where did I come from? Meaning, why am I here? Morality, how should I live? And destiny, where am I going when I die?
Those are the big ones.
Every worldview, every philosophy, every religion, and every political ideology has to provide a coherent, livable answer to those four specific questions.
But answering those questions requires the existence of objective truth. It requires a reality that is true regardless of how I feel about it. And that is exactly what our modern culture is actively, aggressively dismantling.
Very true.
The text talks about the modern humiliation of truth. We are living in a historical moment where mass media, echo chamber technology, and the pervasive philosophy of cultural relativism have severely eroded the very concept of objective reality. We're told constantly from every screen and institution that truth is entirely relative. The mantra of our age is, you have your truth and I have my truth.
It sounds incredibly tolerant and polite on the surface, but the actual psychological result of that relativism isn't liberation. It is deep, crippling insecurity. If everything is relative, then nothing is solid. The sources reference a sweeping Canadian survey of youth, and the findings are incredibly telling about the state of our culture. When these young people were asked what they wanted most in life, they didn't say money or fame or absolute freedom. The overwhelming response was that they craved someone they can trust.
Oh, wow. That breaks your heart. It reveals a generation that feels entirely adrift.
It reveals the damage of relativism. The text also mentions the profound heartbreak of the East German Olympic athletes. For years, they believed they were achieving greatness, only to discover later that their own national leaders and coaches had been secretly doping them, manipulating their bodies and their realities purely for state glory and political propaganda.
That's devastating.
When truth is humiliated, when objective reality is discarded in favor of political narratives or personal gain, the result is always profound betrayal. Youth, and indeed all people, are starving for a solid rock to stand on in a world of constantly shifting sands.
But let me push back here on behalf of the listener, because this is the exact friction point every Christian experiences in the modern world. If our entire culture is operating on the fundamental premise of that's true for you but not for me, how does the book suggest we evaluate the exclusive claims of Christianity without just sounding like dogmatic, intolerant bigots?
It's a real struggle.
If a Christian stands up in a university classroom or a corporate boardroom and says, Jesus is the only way to God, modern culture immediately flags that as arrogant hate speech.
Yeah.
How do we navigate that?
That is the critical apologetic challenge of our time. And the text provides a rigorous intellectual framework for exactly this situation. It doesn't ask the reader or the believer to just accept Christianity on blind, irrational faith or raw, subjective emotion.
Okay, good.
It breaks down 5 rigorous tests, 5 specific criteria for evaluating any worldview claim. This is how we move past pluralistic dismissal, where every idea gets a participation trophy, and actually evaluate truth objectively.
This is incredibly practical. Let's walk through these 5 tests slowly. And to really understand how they work, let's run a modern philosophy. Let's use secular humanism, the idea that human beings are just material atoms, but we should still try to be nice to each other and run it through these tests.
Excellent exercise. The first test is logical consistency. A worldview cannot fundamentally contradict itself. Its foundational premises must hold together logically. If a philosophy claims there are no absolute truths, that statement itself is making an absolute truth claim, rendering the entire philosophy logically inconsistent from the start. It self-destructs.
So if secular humanism claims that we are nothing more than biological machines driven by chemical reactions in our brains, but then it also claims that we should trust human reason to solve the world's problems, that feels logically inconsistent. Why should I trust a chemical reaction in my brain to give me objective truth? It's just fizzing chemistry.
Precisely. It fails the test of logical consistency. The second test is empirical adequacy. Does the worldview correspond to the observable, verifiable reality of the world around us? Can it accurately account for the evidence of science, history, and observed human nature?
So looking at our example, secular humanism often claims that human beings are inherently good, and if we just get enough education and technology, we will eventually build a utopian society. But if we apply the test of empirical adequacy, we just have to open a history book from the 20th century or turn on the evening news to see that humans are incredibly prone to horrific evil, regardless of how much education they have. The worldview doesn't match the observable data of human history.
It fails empirical adequacy. The third test is experiential relevance. Does the worldview actually make sense of the lived human experience? Does it address our deepest psychological longings, our overwhelming sense of guilt, our fear of death, and our desperate need for unconditional love? A worldview might look mathematically perfect on a chalkboard, but if it can't be lived out in the messy, painful reality of human life, it is ultimately inadequate.
If a mother loses a child and secular humanism tells her your child was just a random biological accident that has simply ceased metabolic functioning, that might be their version of biological truth, but it utterly fails the test of experiential relevance. It provides no framework for the depth of her grief or her profound sense that something uniquely valuable has been lost.
Exactly. It cannot carry the weight of human suffering. Now, the fourth test is unaffirmability. Can the core claim of the worldview be consistently affirmed in daily practice? Can you actually live it out?
If you believe we are just deterministic biological machines with no free will, you can't actually live that way. When someone cuts you off in traffic, you don't say, oh, their chemistry made them do it. You get angry because you affirm in practice that they have free will and made a bad choice. You can't affirm determinism in real life.
And the final, fifth test is undeniability. Are there foundational truths within the worldview that are strictly undeniable without rendering all communication, science, and thought completely meaningless? We touched on this earlier with the law of non-contradiction. You cannot say, my car is entirely inside the garage, and my car is entirely outside the garage at the exact same time and in the same way. It is a fundamental rule of reality. You actually have to rely on the law of non-contradiction even to attempt to formulate an argument against it. These 5 tests, logical consistency, empirical adequacy, experiential relevance, unfirmability, and undeniability, provide an intellectual grid to evaluate the claims of Christ or any philosophy fairly and rigorously.
And when you apply those 5 tests to the historical and philosophical claims of Christianity, it holds up.
Right.
But the text makes a massive paradigm-shifting pivot here. When you evaluate Christianity, you find something entirely unique among all the world's religions and philosophies. Here's where it gets really interesting. In Christianity, truth isn't just a philosophical concept. It isn't just a bulleted list of theological propositions you agree with on a test. Truth is a person.
It's embodied.
Jesus stands before humanity, looks us in the eye, and says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." He doesn't just say he teaches the truth the way a professor would. He claims to embody reality itself.
It is the most radical claim ever made in human history, and it changes absolutely everything about how we interact with the concept of truth.
So what is the Christian application here? How does knowing that truth is a living person inspire the listener when they wake up tomorrow morning?
The text points directly to Jesus' prayer in the Gospel of John, chapter 17, verse 17, where he prays for his followers, saying, "Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth." The practical application is that biblical truth is not merely informative. It is powerfully transformative. It sanctifies, which means it sets you apart and changes your nature.
It changes you.
For the Christian, encountering the truth of Christ actively changes you from the inside out. You are inspired to anchor your mind daily in Scripture, not as a textbook to be memorized for a debate, but as a living encounter with the person of truth.
It means you start evaluating the culture around you, the media you consume, the political rhetoric demanding your allegiance, the rapidly shifting social norms on sexuality and identity through a solid biblical framework, rather than letting the shifting hysterical cultural emotions dictate your reality.
When you anchor yourself in the objective truth of Christ, you actually become a beacon of incredible stability. In a world deeply craving someone to trust, as that Canadian survey showed, the Christian who is grounded in the unchanging truth of God offers the world a trustworthy, solid reality. You become a living, breathing demonstration that objective truth exists, that it can be known, and that submitting to it leads to human flourishing, not oppression.
It's powerful to realize that our stubborn commitment to biblical truth isn't just about being right. It is actually a profound act of service to a confused, drowning world.
A lifeline.
But having objective truth in a vacuum is cold. A supercomputer can process truth. What separates a human experiencing God's reality from a machine processing facts? It's what that truth compels us to do for the person sitting across the room from us. Truth without action is sterile. Once you know what is true about God and what is true about the value of humanity, it fundamentally forces you to change the way you interact with others. Truth inevitably and unavoidably transforms our understanding of relationships.
Which brings us to the third component of meaning discussed in the sources: love. Love moves us from individual intellectual truth-seeking into the messy, beautiful realm of interpersonal connection and binding commitments. It represents true relational maturity.
And I get so excited when we talk about this specific section of the text because it really unpacks the brilliant precision of the ancient Greek language, which is absolutely vital for understanding what love actually is. In English, we use the word love for literally everything. It has ruined the concept. I say, I love my spouse, I love deep dish pizza, I love my dog, and I love that new song on Spotify.
It's totally diluted.
It means nothing. But the Greek language is beautifully surgically precise. The text highlights 4 distinct Greek words used to describe different facets of love.
The precision is key to recovering the concept. There is eros, which refers specifically to romantic, passionate, or sexual love. There's philia, which describes the deep, loyal bond of friendship and brotherly affection, the kind of love you have for a comrade in arms.
Okay, 2 down.
There is storge, which represents the natural, protective, familial affection between parents and children or siblings. And finally, at the pinnacle, there's agape, which is the selfless, unconditional, willful love that actively desires and pursues the ultimate good of the other person, completely regardless of the cost to oneself and regardless of whether the other person deserves it.
And the text points out a crucial, non-negotiable common denominator among all 4 of those Greek concepts. They all inherently require commitment, sacrifice, and investment of the self. That entirely contrasts with modern Western culture's cheapened, mass-produced version of free love. Modern culture tries to sell us a version of love that is entirely based on mutual self-gratification, free from any binding obligations, enduring commitments, or difficult sacrifices.
It treats human relationships as purely transactional and entirely disposable. If the relationship stops providing a net positive emotional or physical return on investment, the modern rules of free love dictate that you should discard it and find a new one.
It is the ultimate consumer mindset applied to human souls. Calling self-gratification love is like calling a fast food wrapper a gourmet meal. It might look like it holds something filling, but it's fundamentally empty and disposable.
That's a great analogy.
To understand how destructive this is, think about what we discussed earlier regarding the rules of Elfland. Modern culture says that committing yourself to one person, binding yourself with vows, restricts your freedom. It says keeping your options open is true liberation. But let's go back to Chesterton. The text brings him in again because he offers a brilliant, devastating critique of this concept of free love. Chesterton argued that free love is an oxymoron. It is a complete contradiction in terms. He said that it is the very nature of true love to bind itself. Love inherently seeks to obligate itself to the beloved.
A love that refuses to commit, a love that insists on keeping its options open and one foot out the door, is not actually love at all. It is merely self-interest masquerading as affection.
The commitment isn't an unfortunate byproduct of love. The commitment is the actual evidence of the love. The text highlights a quote from the writer Christopher Morley that I think perfectly captures the urgency and the weight of this true, committed, binding love. He said, "If we all discovered that we had only 5 minutes left to say all that we wanted to say, every telephone booth would be occupied by people calling other people to stammer that we love them."
It's a stroking image. It instantly reveals what truly matters when all the superficialities, the career ambitions, and the trivial distractions of life are abruptly stripped away by the reality of our mortality. Deep, binding, interpersonal connection based on unconditional love is what the human soul actually craves.
So how does this profoundly challenge the Christian listener? What is the daily, gritty application of this third component of meaning when you wake up and have to go to work?
The sources connect this intense demand for committed love directly to the very nature of God himself. It points to the Christian doctrine of the Trinity God as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, as the ultimate eternal model of unity in diversity. God is not a lonely monad who created humans because he was bored or needed an audience. God is, in his very eternal essence, a community of perfect, self-giving agape love.
Wow.
And this agape love was supremely and violently demonstrated in human history through Christ's sacrificial death on the cross. For the Christian listener, grasping this isn't just about passing a theology exam. It is a daily radical call to action. It is a call to view and treat every single person you interact with as possessing the Imago Dei.
Let's make sure we clearly define Imago Dei for anyone who might not be familiar with the theological term.
Imago Dei translates to the image of God. It means that human beings aren't just highly evolved clumps of cellular tissue. Every person has the fingerprint of the divine on them. It gives every human being intrinsic, unbreakable, transcendent value that cannot be earned and cannot be taken away by the state, by illness, or by poverty.
It changes everything about how you treat people. It means the difficult, obnoxious coworker in the cubicle next to you bears the image of God. The person who vehemently disagrees with your politics bears the image of God. The homeless stranger you pass on your commute bears the image of God.
It demands that the Christian replace transient, transactional self-interest with unconditional, covenantal love. It means choosing to actively invest in your local community, honoring your marital and relational commitments, even on the days when they are incredibly difficult and unromantic, and consistently seeking the ultimate good of others ahead of your own immediate gratification. That kind of costly, binding love is how the Christian life becomes a living, undeniable demonstration of the meaning the world is so desperately searching for.
So we have wonder to give life color, truth to give life structure, and love to give life connection. They are incredible. They are the robust building blocks of a beautiful, coherent human life. But, and this is a massive, uncomfortable but, that the text relentlessly forces us to confront. If life simply ends in the grave, if we are truly nothing more than worm food at the end of the day, then all these binding commitments, all these profound discoveries of objective truth, all the breathtaking wonder we've experienced, it is all ultimately erased. It's a beautiful sandcastle built dangerously close to the tide line. The tide of death will eventually come in and wash it all away, leaving nothing. And that stark terrifying reality demands the fourth and final component.
That final necessary component is security. The text uses the poetic, evocative imagery of Alfred Lord Tennyson's poem Crossing the Bar to discuss how we face old age, the decay of our bodies, and our inevitable approaching mortality. As we approach the end of life, a worldview or a system of meaning that is restricted solely to this earthly existence, what philosophers call an immanent frame, proved totally and devastatingly inadequate.
Because if the grave is the final period on the sentence of your life, the sentence doesn't ultimately mean anything. If the universe eventually experiences heat death and all memory of humanity is erased, then playing the piano and murdering a neighbor ultimately have the exact same eternal outcome: nothingness.
Without a transcendent afterlife, without a deeply rooted security that actually survives biological death, the first three components ultimately fail to sustain us. Wonder ends in permanent silent darkness. The truth you discovered is buried with your brain chemistry and forgotten, and the love you sacrificed so much to build is severed forever by the violent finality of death. Without absolute security, the entire structure of human meaning eventually collapses under the weight of mortality.
But this is the absolute crescendo of the entire book. This is how Jesus Christ stands utterly, totally unique among all worldviews, all philosophies, and all religious leaders. Jesus doesn't just offer a good teaching on one or two of these components. He perfectly and seamlessly integrates all four.
He is the literal synthesis of all human longing. He provides the answer that philosophy reaches for but cannot grasp on its own.
Think about the mechanics of how he does this. Jesus provides the ultimate source of wonder by connecting us directly to the infinite creator of the cosmos. He reveals that the artist behind the sunrise knows the number of hairs on our head. He provides ultimate truth because he is the incarnate Word of God. He isn't just pointing to reality, he is reality itself, stepping into human history. He provides ultimate love through the brutal, selfless sacrifice of the cross, demonstrating objectively that God so loved the world that he would endure our punishment. And finally, crucially, he provides ultimate security through the historical reality of the resurrection, physically conquering the grave and guaranteeing eternal life for those who trust in him. The resurrection is the concrete foundation that ensures the sandcastle isn't washed away.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that integration is the genius of the Christian worldview. To ensure the listener can apply this comprehensively, the sources provide what we might call a practical worldview audit. This is where the high theology hits the pavement of your daily walk from a conservative, evangelical perspective. It breaks down how to maintain this integrated worldview in a hostile culture.
Let's get into the specifics of this audit. What are the practical steps the listener can take today?
It breaks down into three actionable areas: input, conversation, and surrender. First, input. The text challenges believers to aggressively filter the media they consume, the television shows, the endless social media algorithms, the 24-hour news cycle, through the lens of the Apostle Paul's command in Philippians 4:8. Are you intentionally filling your mind with whatever is true, noble, pure, and lovely? The practical application is to actively, ruthlessly reject and cut off content that normalizes cynicism, mocks holiness, or denies the reality of God's truth.
This goes back to our earlier point about the weariness of pleasure. If you spend 3 hours every night doom scrolling through the madman's worldview on your phone, a worldview that constantly preaches materialism, outrage, and self-gratification, you shouldn't be surprised when you wake up the next morning feeling the madman's existential despair. You are poisoning your own well. What is the second area of the audit?
Conversation. In a culture saturated with aggressive relativism, Christians are explicitly called to defend the faith and articulate the truth. But the text heavily emphasizes the biblical mandate that this must be done with gentleness and respect. You do not win people to the truth of Christ through intellectual arrogance, political outrage, or shouting matches on the internet. You win them by offering the coherent, integrated, beautiful reality of the gospel as a deeply satisfying answer to their own unmet, desperate longings for truth and unconditional love.
You offer a drowning person a lifeline. You don't lecture them on their swimming technique. You offer them living water. You don't drown them in it. And what is the final ultimate area of the worldview audit?
Surrender. This brings the entire book full circle, back to where we started with the illusion of autonomy. The daily, sustainable walk of a Christian requires consciously and repeatedly yielding your demand for autonomy. It means waking up every single morning and actively submitting your daily plans, your fierce career ambitions, your financial anxieties, and your closest relationships to God's absolute sovereignty. It is the difficult daily practice of echoing Christ in the garden. Not my will, but yours be done. It requires trusting, even when it's hard, that the Creator's design for your life is infinitely more secure and deeply fulfilling than your own desperately flawed attempts to be the captain of your own soul.
To summarize the massive journey we've taken today, can man live without God isn't just an academic, philosophical defense of the existence of a deity to win college debates. It is a comprehensive, life-saving roadmap for human flourishing. It argues convincingly, through logic, history, and the deepest aches of the human heart, that the things we desire most fundamentally, the color of wonder, the solid ground of truth, the binding connection of love, and the eternal safety of security, can only be fully realized and sustained when the creator of those things is at the absolute center of our lives.
It serves as both a devastating diagnosis of our current cultural emptiness and the singular historical prescription for its cure. And as we conclude, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day, drawing on the book's deep, penetrating warnings about human nature. When you inevitably feel that familiar weariness and emptiness creeping in, despite having a full pantry, a stable job, and every modern technological convenience at your fingertips.
It's so easy to reach for the anesthetic.
Yes, it is easy to reach for more entertainment, another online purchase, or the next fleeting pleasure to numb the ache. But in that moment, ask yourself this hard question. Are you trying to find ultimate meaning in the gift, rather than the giver? To attempt to live a fulfilled life without God is to commit the tragic idolatry of the gift. It is worshiping the creation rather than the creator, demanding that temporary things provide eternal satisfaction. The truest, most profound, and most radical act of rebellion against a despairing nihilistic world isn't anger or endless pleasure-seeking. It is simply falling to your knees in quiet, joyful submission to worship the giver of life himself.
That is a profound, life-altering place to end. The invisible foundation matters more than the paint on the walls. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly important deep dive. We strongly encourage you to take this robust, integrated sense of wonder, truth, love, and security and carry it boldly into the visible, everyday parts of your life this week. Until next time.